All right. Hey, folks, it's Faz here from Faz Lifts. Today, I'll be talking about sodium and potassium, some of the guidelines, how they relate to you and your health. So, firstly, thanks for making it onto my channel. If you have any questions or comments, pop them down below. And if you'd like to work with me on your own physique and strength goals, there is a link in the description. Okay. So, before I get into this episode, because it's going to be a little bit study heavy, right? So, I want to just give you a quick TLDR, a quick preface. Now, if you are eating enough fruits and vegetables during the course of the day and you're salting your food liberally and you're drinking enough water, you're probably okay. But this is an important topic and it's worth discussing. And I want to present to you a bit of background on this, some perspective, and also some studies in relation to what you should be doing with regards to sodium and potassium. So first of all, now, back in the day when we first got in, when the general population first got introduced to macros and calories and if it fits your macros and all that kind of stuff, that was roughly about 2005, right about the time that MyFitnessPal was exploding in popularity. The general population got exposed to macros and calories. And we started to see the whole if it fits your macros movements, and everyone was talking macros. Before then, everyone was talking foods, meal plans, and all that kind of stuff. And it was only a few select bodybuilders that actually did macros. So Lee Labrada was one of the first guys that I'm aware of that used the macros and calories approach. And that was back in the Lee Haney era. And then after him, Dorian Yates very famously used the macros and calories approach. And then since about 2000, every bodybuilder pretty much was at least aware of macros and calories, even if they didn't specifically use them themselves. But the general population had caught on to this and were full bore into it. Now, there were a couple of fallouts from the whole if it fits your macros approach. The first fallout was that there was this massive focus on macros and calories. Now, while MyFitnessPal does list micronutrition, most people have enough of a problem just wrapping their heads around macros. And the way that MyFitnessPal is set up, there is more of an inherent focus on macros and calories, regardless of, say, micronutrition like vitamins, minerals, all that kind of stuff. There's not as much of a focus on that. And the second thing, the consequence was people started to become a lot more flexible with what they would try and get away with in the diet. So it wasn't just substitutions like, hey, can I have rice rather than potatoes? It became things, it very quickly went to the extreme of, okay, you know what I'm going to do today? I'm just going to have protein shakes and Pop-Tarts because it fits into my macros. Trust me, people were doing that back in about 2008 sort of time. Some of you guys will remember that. So people really started to explore the boundaries. Like with any new concept, you explore the boundaries of what's possible, what's capable, and there are always people around the world to stretch those boundaries. Now, all of those consequences basically led to people having less of a focus on micronutrition, less of a focus particularly on balancing sodium and potassium. Now, throughout history, people have been focused on, well, people have had too much junk food. Throughout sort of modern history, people have had too much junk food and not enough actual healthy food like fruits and vegetables. That's one of the big problems in today's society. Now, the if it fits your macros approach really just rode that wave. So you had a lot of Gen Pop who struggle with eating too much junk food and not enough fruits and vegetables. We're looking at this if it fits your macros approach as a way of eating all that junk food within macro approach and calorie approach, and were successful. They were losing weight. You had doctors doing Twinkie diets and losing weight and improving their health markers, but all that fell the wayside was sodium and potassium and micronutrition. That fell by the wayside. Now, that's where I want to begin this discussion, because I feel the next tier down from once you've sorted out your overall calories and then potentially you've sorted out your macros, the next tier down is your micronutrition and your sodium and potassium in particular. I feel they're that important because they can have such an acute daily effect on how you feel and how you look like. So, like, it's no coincidence, sodium and potassium is what bodybuilders manipulate in the final week leading up to a show to get them that really dry, shrink-wrapped look. Sodium and potassium can have a massive difference on your physique in the short term. We're talking hours. All right. So let's begin with the slides. Now, I want to first start this discussion by talking about a little bit about the government guidelines. So what was the government response to people eating too much sort of junk food and not enough fruits and vegetables? Bearing in mind, fruits and vegetables are loaded with potassium. Junk food is loaded with sodium. So the average, I think the average person in the UK, they're said to eat about 10 to 12 grams of sodium a day, which is a hell of a lot. Like, that's about, I don't know off the top of my head, but about 15 to 20 grams of salt, which is a ridiculous amount. So the government response was to say to try and get people to reduce the amount of sodium they ate. All right. Now, there wasn't that much attention paid to balancing things out. So, as we'll see in the research later on, the research really points to getting a balance right. So, the USDA guidelines say 2.3 grams of sodium, which is quite low, and potassium in the 4.7 grams range. So you've got there a massive disparity between potassium, which is super high, and sodium, which is actually relatively low, considering the potassium. Bearing in mind, most modern day people who aren't interested in diet, who just eat like junk or whatever, are getting about 10 to 12 grams of sodium and maybe a gram, if they're lucky, of potassium. So these guidelines are completely reversing that over the head. They're really pushing for people to fight back against like eating lots of sodium. The guidelines from the WHO are pretty much the same. Sodium at 2 grams and potassium at 3.5. Now, the British Nutrition Foundation are a little bit different. They have salt at 6 grams, which means sodium would be a little bit lower, about 4 grams. Really, that's just because it's a consequence of they believe that the average person eats about 10 to 12 grams of sodium, so they're just trying to get people to eat less. So while the figure is higher than the USDA and WHO guidelines, it's still the same sentiment. It's like eat less sodium. And they don't actually specify potassium at all. They don't seem to think it's that important, at least not that I could find. So the government response has been to try and get people to cut back salt at any cost. And I want to explain today why that might be a good intention. It's a little bit like the vegetable intake recommendations. So for example, with vegetables, in the UK at least, the government tells us to eat 5 a day, which is roughly 400 grams of vegetables. Now we know from the research that about 800 grams is actually where you start to see benefit. And recently it's been told to us, we've been told by the NHS that the reason health ministers chose 400 grams because it was a step in the right direction. Now, you guys tell me what you think about that. Like, for a lot of people that I know, and even for myself, before I really got into my diet and what I was eating, I thought many years ago that if I was hitting 400 grams of vegetables on any given day, I was doing a great job, because most days I would get no more than 100 or 200 grams. And then I thought, well, at least I'm halfway there. But like, the reality is 200 grams is woefully inadequate. 400 grams is still massively inadequate. So, but it's a step in the right direction. And I feel this is potentially what the government has done in this instance as well, just trying to get people to move in the right direction. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. Like, I applaud them for that. That's great. You know, you're trying to get people at least moving in the right direction, but it might be more helpful to give them a broader perspective of what actually they need, according to the research. And that's kind of what I want to present today. And before I move on, I'll say this is all just for people who are healthy, who are otherwise healthy. For people who might have impaired kidney function or other kinds of diseases, this advice is going to be a bit wonky, and you need to consult with your health professional on that. So just a quick sort of list of like side effects here. First of all, if you don't keep your sodium and potassium levels in balance, you run the risk of the really nasty things like increased blood pressure, the silent killer, heart disease, stroke, memory decline, osteoporosis, and a bunch of other stuff. If you don't specifically keep your potassium intake in check, you run the risk of the following. Now, before I read these out, think about what it feels like when you've gone on, say, let's say you've fallen off your diet. I'm sure it doesn't happen to you guys. It doesn't happen to me. Of course it doesn't. So let's say you've fallen off your diet for like an evening, okay? And you've just ordered the pizza and the brownies and the chocolate and everything else. And you wake up the next morning, you got a bit of water retention, okay? Maybe your heart rate's higher. Maybe you got a bit of blood pressure. Your blood pressure's up a little bit. You're thirsty. Yeah. And you may be even a bit constipated. These are all side effects of not having enough potassium in your diet. So the side effects can come that quickly. And if you ever wonder what that is, like, why do you get those side effects if you've just fallen off your diet and eaten a bunch of rubbish? A lot of it is to do with potassium. So you're not getting enough potassium in that evening or that day, or maybe even a couple of days, and it has an immediate effect on your body by it makes you hold on to water, raise your blood pressure, etc., all that kind of stuff. So what we want to do is we want to aim to have a balance between the amount of sodium and potassium which is right for us. And as I said at the beginning of the video, if you are eating plenty of fruits and vegetables and you are salting your food, odds are you're okay. Okay. So one thing I do want to address is the whole salt controversy. There is quite a lot of controversy on salt because the government have done so much to say people need to eat less salt. And again, I'm not disagreeing with that. I think that generally comes from a good place. But like with the vegetable thing, people can take it and run with it, and it's not necessarily representative of the truth. So we had this Cochrane review here, which said involved a study of 6,250 subjects, and it found no strong evidence that cutting salt intake reduces the risk of heart attack, strokes, or death. So that's a big study. The next one here was I won't read the whole thing out. Basically, it said it was an imbalance between sodium and potassium that causes the problem. It is people eating way too much salt and far too little potassium, and that's what causes the increased risk of heart attacks. Now, when does that happen? Well, it happens in a society where people eat way too much junk food and they don't eat enough fruits and vegetables because it's way too high sodium and not high enough potassium. That's the problem. So my question to you guys is, and this is more of a rhetorical question, is the solution to just drastically cut your salt and never worry about your potassium? Or is the solution to increase your potassium intake via healthy amounts of fruits and vegetables and then look at balancing your salt a little bit, because you'll be eating less because you're not eating so much junk food? What do you think? What's the solution? Is it to get the balance right, or is it just to indiscriminately slash sodium, which is an essential nutrient for us? All right, so next up, just to finish off with, these are my personal daily targets. This is what I take or what I get to feel good. Now, I will say the 5 grams of potassium is all through my food. That is all through my food. I'm not saying you guys need as much as this. Like, I train a lot. I go to the gym a lot. So you might like even 3 grams each is probably pretty good. But these are my personal daily targets. I go with about 5 grams of sodium. Now that is via salting my food, and 5 grams of potassium, that's all from my food. So on any given day, I might have as much as 1.5 kilos of fruit and vegetables. Yeah, about that much. Just did some maths off the top of my head. And that is sufficient to get me enough potassium. I don't need to supplement at all. And I just salt my food to taste. That's it. So if you want sort of like what I do, I eat enough fruits and vegetables and I just liberally salt my food to taste. And so as long as it still tastes good, then I know that I'm in a good place. I'm having enough. And for me, that's fine. It shows up as really good levels on my blood work, my urea levels, my electrolyte, all that kind of stuff shows up as A-OK. So that's what I do. I encourage you on this topic to look at the research, especially if you're someone who's shied away from salt in the past, who doesn't salt their food. Like, I have people who come to me who do like a contest prep, for example, or even just fat loss clients who say, "Oh, I'm doing great, Faz. I'm not salting my food." And I'm like, hold on, I never told you not to salt your food. so I think it's still something which is in the sphere of like fitness knowledge, which I don't think is talked about enough. And obviously, if you have a health issue, this is a topic which is a bit more nuanced, and you need to speak to your health advisor about it. But for the general person, I really would encourage you to look at the research, look at what I present to you today, look at research studies which talk about salt intake, and compare that to your own blood work and try and find a happy medium for you. And certainly not shy away from salt. All right, folks, hope you found that useful. It's a bit of a heavier topic than normal, but I think it's important, so that's why I did it. All right, guys, I'll speak to you next time.